Welcome to this week's Leading with Purpose podcast. This week, I'm really delighted that we've got Neil Parkinson, CEO of Curtins, and Rhiannon Carss, who is Culture and Engagement Director for Curtins. It's an engineering consultancy that is really driving all sorts of completely different engineering projects. We're going to hear about some of them later. But in a sense, through that infrastructure push, really connecting people up literally to opportunities, both with its own opportunities and, if you like, the footprint that it has in those wider communities that it's working in. So we're going to dig into all of that today. I'm delighted to have both of you here. Thank you so much. If I could start with you, Neil. I mean, first of all, Curtins, I mean, it's a huge success story, isn't it? And it's a brilliant success story for Liverpool, but it all starts with a man called Bill, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I suppose to explain who we are, you have to go back to him. So indulge me for a minute, if you don't mind, to take you back to the start. So if I go back to we're in the mid-1950s, and Bill Curtin is a lecturer at Liverpool College of Building, which is now John Moores University. He's in the Civil and Structural Engineering department, and he had a particular specialism in the ground, geotechnical engineering. And by all accounts, he was quite good at it. And he got a bit of a reputation locally for helping out the industry when they had problems on projects, problems on sites.
Like a bit of a troubleshooter. Like if you had a problem, you gave Bill a call. Yeah.
So he started moonlighting. He started working evenings and weekends, troubleshooting for local builders, local consultants, local clients. And good work begets more work. So he kept winning work. So it got to the point where he'd won so much work, he needed to recruit. So he recruited, of course, his best and brightest students. So he took somebody on. They started doing more work. He gave his house over, his 3-bed semi in Egbert in South Liverpool. The back bedroom, the parlour, the dining room
steadily takes over.
Became the drawing office, and they won more and more work. And it got to the point in the late 50s where Ella, his wife, I think had just had enough. Had enough of the family home being given over to the business, the fledgling company that didn't really exist because he was still a lecturer. And they agreed that he would quit his job and start a business. And so W.G. Curtin and Partners was born out of that. So we moved to offices in Rodney Street, which is the south of Liverpool city centre, in what was known then, less so now, as the Harley Street of the north, largely because of how many medical professionals worked on this Edwardian townhouse terrace. And I think that told you a little bit about where he thought engineering was in terms of where it ranked alongside the medical profession, the legal profession. And that became our home for 30 plus years. So the business started in 1960, did quite nicely. And around about that time, he became friends with Father Jim Dunn, who's the parish priest at Toxteth. Toxteth is synonymous with the riots from the 80s. And it's always been the home of migrant communities. So in the 60s, it's the home of the West Indian community, migrant community predominantly. As you might imagine, a lot of poverty and deprivation. And Bill worked with Father Jim to provide opportunities for teenage kids, provide apprenticeships. So I often tell the story of it. Imagine in 1960s Britain, a teenage boy, normally lads, dressed in a suit of West Indian background, walking down the Harley Street of the North. We think nothing of that today. I suspect it was viewed differently in 1960s Britain. We talk about social mobility and inclusivity, and these phrases roll off our tongues, and we're all totally committed to it. Bill Curtin was doing it before it even existed.
It was his instinct, wasn't it?
Every time I say that, I can't believe it. Can't believe he was doing it. He's just naturally doing it. So armed with all these apprentices that he was taking on, the business grew. And towards the late 60s, I think he started to realise that it was going to outlive him. He got a sense of his own mortality, and that was really reinforced by being offered to be bought out by Ernest Green, who was a white young Green, who are now Tetra Tech. So he dismissed the offer out of hand. But again, it was this sense of, right, well, what am I going to do? What is the next step? And that was where he set us on the road to what is now our employee ownership. So independent ownership. He brought in 2 of his senior people to take equal ownership. So there was 3 of them that owned the business.
And it obviously made him think, if I don't want to do this, then how do I fix the fact I'm not going to be around forever and ever?
Absolutely. And how do I give people opportunities within the business? This is a people business. It's run by the people for the people. So he brought people on to do that. And again, the independent ownership he set up in 1970 was effectively the precursor for the EOT that we set up in 2021. The business again started really growing. We expanded into Manchester and London around that time. And the reality is he was able to focus on perhaps things he preferred doing and left the day-to-day run of the business to others. So he started going around universities, predominantly in the north of England, guest lecturing. His love of academia never
And in a
left
sense,
him.
maybe his love of connecting with that next generation.
Yeah, teaching, developing
exchanging
talent,
knowledge.
sharing
Yeah,
knowledge.
he clearly understood how important that was.
Yeah, so he started going around the universities, sharing knowledge, but I dare say also talent spotting.
Indeed.
And we ended up recruiting a lot of graduates in the 70s, and perhaps no surprise, in the 90s they were the senior partners, the owners of the business. So that idea of being able to progress, start at the bottom and progress to the very top, again, that's my background too. It's that there's almost an obligation we all have to do that within the business, to provide those opportunities. And again, he started all that in the 70s. He was also, I remember Ella telling me the story of their first date. Their first date was a communist party.
This is his wife?
Yeah, Ella, his wife. Their first date was a communist party rally in the late 40s, because he was most definitely left-leaning politically.
Yeah.
I guess in the 50s and 60s, it was perhaps not a great life choice to publicise your affiliation to the Communist Party. But as I say, he was always left-leaning. And in the 77 election, he campaigned for the Labour Party.
Yeah.
He counted Michael Foot, the one-time leader, as one of his close friends. And I suppose that left-leaning social conscience is absolutely what drove him. And
I think he sounds like he had a very different sense of how business could work.
Absolutely.
Perhaps than other people around him at the time. And it would have been interesting as well, because actually he was finding a way to bridge the divide, because that was a version of Britain, wasn't it, where there were unions on one side, government on the other, and he was finding a way to overcome that divide between bosses and workers. And
absolutely,
it's interesting.
And I dare say you can start to understand why we're driven to run the business the way we run it in his image. So in the spirit of providing opportunities to create an inclusive environment, to allow people to progress irrespective of background. So it's opportunity for all. As I say, there's almost a moral obligation we all have, because that was how he set it up. And likewise, the ownership, the fact that the business is owned by us, for us, not by some far-flung board making decisions defined by numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about all of us and how we can run the business in the best interest of everyone in it.
And we'll come on to that later, because I think it is a core part of what sets Curtins apart, in terms of this very simple but powerful fact: it's owned by everybody who works there.
Yeah.
But Rhiannon, I want to come over to you, because obviously culture and engagement that's your role. And clearly, do you feel a little bit like you're almost a custodian, making sure it continues to develop and be the best version of what it can be in today's world, in a sense, which is different again to Bill's. But how do you go about bringing that alive? There's one thing to have a brilliant, amazing heritage that's actually really unique. But there's another thing to kind of somehow make it stay authentic for today. So tell us a little bit about what you have to do Like how hard it is, the challenges, but also, I guess, the rewards for being able to do it well.
I suppose the first thing to remember is it's very deliberate. It's not accidental that purpose is literally built into every layer of our business in terms of our decision making, from the design and project delivery to how we run Curtins. It's an alchemy of lots and lots of different kind of parts and people
like
and heritage.
Mosaic.
Exactly, that all come together. And it can be quite easy to kind of assume, right, well, if all these things happen, you've got this really strong heritage, then doesn't this kind of happen by accident? And the reality is, no, we do have to be deliberate about it. It doesn't happen by accident. But there are lots and lots of things that contribute to how we kind of weave that, I suppose, how we weave that tapestry. And some of those are really deliberate in terms of keeping, purpose at the heart of our culture by our policies. It could be something like that, our environment. So putting all of our policies are people first rather than profit. And that's our people, that's the communities that we work on behalf of, that's our clients. So you've got those really kind of practical things around our policies. But it's also the less tangible parts as well, I think, that kind of make up Curtins. Like Neil was saying around, this real drive to promote and nurture that talent from within. It's getting people to reach their own potential, whatever that might be. And that really is like a bedrock of Curtins. Neil's been with the business for 30 plus years. I joined 15 years ago and thought it'll do me for a year. That sounds like a nice place to be. And 15 years later, I'm ready to see out my life at Curtins, to be honest. So we do. I mean, it doesn't always work. Don't get me wrong. There are times when it's not perfect. Absolutely, it's not perfect. But I think that you can't fake it. You can't fake that authenticity of being purpose-led. So we weave it through. We weave it through our policies. We weave it through our culture. We weave it through our environments. And what that does is that attracts the talent and retains that talent, which ultimately keeps it going. Our former chief exec, who retired from the business after 43 years, Rob Melling, he joined at 17 as an apprentice and went on to lead the business for 20 years. And he always said to us, we're all just custodians of Curtins.
I was going to say, he was very humble, wasn't he?
Yeah, we're all just custodians of Curtins, and our job is to leave it in a better place for the next generation than which we kind of received it. And that really is a kind of force that we all live by, not just as, board directors who are ultimately responsible for the day-to-day running of the business, but actually every single member of Curtins would, I think, kind of hold that in high regard.
Well, I think everything you just described, the talent attraction, we attract people who are attracted by that purpose. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's becoming within our business that the people who join us are driven by purpose, who want to do the right thing. It's not all about profit. We're a business, clearly. We can't make losses, but let's do it in the right way, on the right types of projects, and let's do the right things with it when we get it too.
And it feels to me like, in a sense, you can't make a profit without talent. It's a people business, isn't it? In so many ways. And I think for a lot of people watching or listening to this, and they'll think, oh, infrastructure, engineering, that's all about physical bricks and mortar. And in a sense, none of that happens without the people, and it's all infrastructure for people. So fundamentally, it's people who are at the heart of it, I guess.
Yeah, well, when you talk about infrastructure, there's so many different definitions of infrastructure. So the social infrastructure that you're describing, we do a lot of work with schools and universities. So we deliver schools, we deliver university buildings, but that is where we educate the people who in the future will be designing those buildings. I suppose it's more, you're nearer to the source when we're dealing with universities, because you can see how a graduate, we could engage with an undergraduate on a project, and then very shortly thereafter, they work with us and are involved in the next project, making that campus that they've just walked off better than it was when they were there. In the same.
So do you overtly use some of those footprints that you've got in that local community then, whether it's students or anywhere else, to think, right, how do we spread this message to that next generation that this is a fantastic company, a great sector to get into?
Yeah, 100%. So I would say the reason we have 14 offices around the country is that local agenda, so that we can impact many communities. We want our people to deliver projects locally that benefit the communities they live in. And I dare say they can brag about it. Look at that school I've delivered. Look at that new housing development that we've delivered. Look at the new hospital that my baby was born in that I was involved in delivering. How wonderful is that for our people to have and a story to be able to tell to their family and friends.
It really does make people's hearts sing. You can see it when they know that they've been involved in something that's made their community better. I mean, I feel it. I've not been near a drawing board in my life, but I drive past the Albert Dock every day on my way to work, and Bill Curtin kind of stopped that being demolished. He campaigned for that to have a new lease of life and saved that, which was an absolute catalyst for the regeneration of Liverpool, of which our business, but also my family have benefited from. I drive past that with my kids and go, that's one of Mummy's.
And it is such a great site as well. I mean, I totally agree. It would have been a travesty had that disappeared. You know, it's part of the social fabric, I feel. I'm not from Liverpool, but that's my sense of it, of the city as much as anything else. You know, and as someone who lives in London, represented a London seat, you know, so often I would go into Westminster and just look at those amazing buildings and just think about the people who built them. I mean, what I've always said, the most incredible time to have been in London would have been sort of 1880 to 1910, because so many of the streets that everyone lives on today would have been built. You know, and I think it's that excitement for what a business like Curtins does now, that you offer people coming into the sector. So I want to get onto the employee-owned trust in a second, but let's just talk about some of that work that you do both in communities, but what it means as well. So I think the work that you do on STEM and the STEM ambassadors, let's get into some of that upstream work, you know, just bringing this alive for people, but giving them that chance to have a pathway into the opportunities.
Yeah, so I suppose the STEM work, that it's quite a broad church. This we're trying to encourage anybody into construction and engineering through STEM subjects. So get engaged in primary schools and in secondary schools to, I suppose, extol the virtues of our industry and what a wonderful place it is to work and the positive difference and impact you can make. I'll layer that a little bit more. What we're also trying to do in that is, construction and property is a male-dominated industry, or has been, and we're desperately trying to change that. And schools and STEM is that's the first. That's the first point of action in primary schools. That building and property is interesting for everyone, not just for the boys. And then as you move through the secondary schools, to continue that, to make sure we're engaging positively with all schools, single-sex schools too.
Yeah.
And I dare say the more female engineers we have, the more role models we have for the budding female engineers. So the STEM engagement for us is very much pointed towards gender balance and trying to address that industry-wide issue that we have.
Why fish in half the talent pool when
indeed.
you can get to the rest of it? And I think what's interesting about what Curtins does is, as you say, Rhiannon, it is very purposeful. So it starts in schools, goes on to insight days, people can actually come in. I think one of the things that's still unique really about what you do is the work with teachers, which you should definitely talk about, because it's such an innovative but simple idea. And I think in a version of Britain where, I mean, even now, young people so often don't know what careers to do. And they're asking teachers who could tell them about a career in teaching, but, you know, not necessarily anything else. I think Curtins has come up with a really innovative way, hasn't it, of bringing teachers into Curtins to find out what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're not an enormous business, right? So we've got 376 staff across 14 locations. We don't have infinite resources, whether that's time or budget or whatever it may be. So we're always just trying to think about how can we do things a little bit differently, where that ripple effect will go almost beyond what we can directly affect. And the STEM teacher programme was definitely an example of that, whereby we go into schools in all of our locations, geographical locations. And we do try and focus on all-girls schools, for example, or schools from more socio-economically deprived areas. But we can only reach so far. And you spend an hour with 30 kids, you maybe will inspire a couple of people in that room. But we really want to look at, right, how can we make sure that just lasts a little bit longer? Because you're right, we need to sort of challenge people's ideas of what is engineering. Well, I need to be good at maths. Okay, yes. But we really want people who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, brilliant communicators. So it's really trying to open things up a little bit. So what we've done is we've brought teachers into Curtins to do a placement with us. Once we had an art teacher who came in, so not even in a STEM subject. And she went back and then worked with her students through their art lessons on this amazing collage. It was actually of the Albert Dock, of the Albert Dock. And so she was weaving engineering into her art lessons, but they then looked at us as a school about how they could weave that in through their English and humanities, as well as, the more traditionally STEM subjects as well. So at that point, when you've got one teacher who maybe sees a couple of hundred kids a week, the impact is so much greater than we could just kind of do on our own. So we're always trying to just think of things that are just, I suppose, a little bit different, a little bit more innovative, but ultimately that just have the greatest impact that we can.
I think two or three things there. One, it underlines that there's two challenges for a business like Curtins. One is almost building the capacity. Mm-hmm. Like the talent pipeline for people to come into. And then the second is making sure it stretches into those people and places, different people, different places, to be specific, to make sure everyone's able to get in it, not just, if you like, the people we might expect you to say, brilliant, this is the kind of thing for me. I think the final thing that's really fascinating is obviously you're sat here, you work for Curtins, you're not an engineer, as you said. Neil, you have come through that route. But I think the point around English and if you like, art, all these things are ways of communicating the idea of what could be there in this space and almost a vision of like the Albert Docks, like how it could be. If people like Bill hadn't been able to articulate that alternative to what was being proposed back then, it would have been a very different outcome. And so I think getting across this sense that it's so much more than just being able to add up or do a bit of engineering. It's fundamentally about being able to develop a vision and then communicate it, but have the kind of detail behind that to be able to actually make it happen in practice.
I dare say we've only just started, I was going to say realising that, but doing that it's not just that. We've talked about the STEM subjects, and they're obviously important, but the arts as well, and whatever the arts might mean, the art of communication. So to spread that farther and wider, so that we want the most diverse talent pool that we possibly can have within our business, and that diversity means anything, any type of diversity, such that we get different ways of thinking. We're going to get the best solutions by doing that. And the best solutions on our projects, in the way we run our business, in the way we manage our people, by having the diversity of thought. So that's absolutely what that's leaning into. So
let's start to look at the employee-owned trust and if you like, the impact of that. And then I kind of want to start to think, okay, so what can the rest of us learn from the Curtins model, the Curtins experience? So in a way, we talked about Rob, your predecessor, didn't we, Neil? And I almost feel like the shift to an employee-owned trust was his sense of legacy and thinking, right, what's my step on the journey that I can hand over to you, Neil? Tell us a little bit about that switch happening, what it meant for people. And I've talked to Curtins employees who are part of some of that decision process now. Just bring it alive for people. How is it different to maybe the kind of business that a lot of people listening to this might work in?
Well, I suppose the way its genesis was in the way we were owned previously. Like many other consultants in our industry, we had the owners were the leaders. So the board was the ownership, and the first step was, I suppose, breaking that mould. Now, Rob started this in 2004, a wider share ownership. So once you'd worked at Curtins for more than 2 years, you were entitled to buy shares in the business. So that was massively more inclusive than it had been before. And maybe as much as 20% of the business by 2021 was owned by the wider staff. So it was wonderfully inclusive, but not inclusive enough, because if you couldn't afford to buy shares, you couldn't buy shares, even though you're entitled to. So we weren't able to benefit all 370.
And just explain to people about buying shares. So bought a share, then you'd have a share of the profits or the outcomes.
Yeah, quite. So if the business made profit, it would pay a dividend on those shares. So it was very different. It speaks a lot to how forward-thinking Rob was that we introduced that in the first place. And it did set us on the road to...
It was the next step, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, absolutely. So it was a natural evolution. So we didn't go from having 5 owners to 400 in one fell swoop. We went from maybe 100, 110 up to 400. But the way it has now worked is these shares have all been bought by Curtins Trustees Limited, and they are now held in trust for the benefit of our current and future employees. So that's 100%. So any profits that are made by the business, it is to be distributed or used in whatever way is in the best interests of all our people. So some of that is distributing profits. So we want to make that part of the messaging, I suppose, is get better at what we do. Let's do things better, be more efficient, be more productive, and then the net gain will be a more profitable business. But again, not profit for profit's sake. Let's be successful in the areas we want to be successful. Let's be involved in purposeful projects. Let's do the projects we want to work on, not projects that are driving the greatest level of profit. So again, when we make that profit, we can distribute it. So that is all members of staff, or everyone receives a profit share at the end of the year, assuming we make a profit. And we often tell people within the business there's only 2 things we can do with profit. One is distribute it, or one's invest it back in the business. There's nobody else taking it out. There's no external shareholders. It's very different that. So that's very outcome focused. That's what you get out of it, but it's also what you put into it. So being involved in decision making. We've got an employee forum, so we all of our 14 offices have representatives on that forum, and they're involved in shaping, not making decisions, but shaping them. The board are often playing policies and ideas through that forum to get the feedback from the wider business, and I dare say that's changing policies or just tweaking them where they need to be tweaked to get these marginal gains.
And do you feel like you've both seen a change in the culture since it's come in? And Rhiannon, how would you say you feel it's made Curtins different?
Do you know, it's not one of those things where I think you woke up the next day and go, oh, it feels really different today. And I think there was a little bit of, for a small period of time, probably people going, what actually is this about? How is this going to feel different day by day? And I think that was the case for all of us, to a degree. But I think the really defining moment was when we had our first employee forum meeting. So these are representatives from all of our 14 geographical locations who've been elected into that position as a representative of where, of their office, of where they're from. And once you get all of those people together, it feels very, very genuine. And I think that what we saw then was this move from, perhaps feeling a bit transactional, as a job, to actually feeling, no, I'm an owner, I'm part of this. Neil goes around the offices and delivers an owner's update, so a roadshow that is an owner's update, because people are owners of Curtins and we want to make sure that they feel like owners of Curtins. And that's both in terms of the benefits of a profit share, but I think more importantly in terms of the voice of everybody at Curtins kind of uniting and coming together. And when you walk into any Curtins office, it is warm, it is welcoming. And we get that, a lot of people tell us that, whether they're coming for a job interview or a client's dropping by, they do get this sense of real pride from people at Curtins. Yes, in terms of the projects that we've talked about, but actually just feeling part of that. So it is absolutely part of who we are.
I felt like the other thing it's doing is it's exposing people much earlier in their careers to the kinds of decisions that they may well be taking at a later
100%.
stage. And so actually they're having to put themselves in the board's shoes and think, well, what is the right thing to do? Because if we get these decisions wrong, it'll cost money that we could have invested, and that's for all of us. But also that they're, seeing those trade-offs that you make running any organisation and having to think themselves through it as well.
One of the things I found noticeable this year, Rhiannon's referenced these owners updates. So go around all of the offices providing updates to our shareholders, to our owners, and that's very much the language I've used. That my job is to report to our owners, and that owners update is very much these the commercial aspects of our business. What do the numbers look like? What is the income? What is the cash position? What does this mean? And what does this then mean to how much we can reinvest in the business, where we might reinvest? What does that mean to profit share at the end of the year? Everybody's involved in those decisions as we're going through the year, and can start to see the impact of changes that we're making or decisions that we're making. One of the things that's come through the forum a number of times is about the projects we're working on, and where we can occasionally have ethical challenges about the projects we're working on. And so who's making those calls on what are the right projects? And everyone has a slightly different ethical line on what represents, no, this is a purposeful project, or no, it's not actually. And again, our people are being involved in those decisions, and recognising the commerciality of some of those decisions as well, that if we're not working on those projects, what does that then mean? What do we have to do as an alternative? So yes, absolutely, everybody being exposed to these commercial decisions that perhaps before they wouldn't have.
And before we move on to some of those learnings for if you like a wider country, I also want to talk about, obviously there's the whole progression route that we've briefly touched on. And I think for me, you combine that with some of the reverse mentoring, for example, it's really, all of this is breaking down those barriers, isn't it, between people earlier on in their career and later. And let's touch upon some of the brilliant work on gender and getting more women into construction. So, Rhiannon, talk us through both of those areas.
So I think in terms of talent, in terms of getting the best out of our people so that they feel fulfilled as well, there's absolutely programs around technical excellence, right? So we want our engineers to be the best engineers out there. We want them to provide the best solutions for our clients. That's a given. I think that's probably an expectation in our industry that's what you would get. But at Curtins, it's so much more than that. So things like our graduate academy. So we bring people in at graduate level, straight from university, and then they automatically enroll on a 4-year course. And I suppose picking up on the points that we've just been discussing there, that includes business and commercial acumen, as well as things like health and safety. They'll do modules on marketing and business development and project profitability, for example. So right from a kind of, couple of months ago,
like a mini MBA almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
A couple of months ago, I was in uni, and now I'm actually, working out how to run this project for the benefit, of the business. So there's things like that are quite broad. We also have our reverse mentoring that you mentioned. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and we're not overly prescriptive on exactly like how we want those pairings to work. But essentially, for those that don't know, a reverse mentoring is a program where a senior member of Curtins gets mentored by somebody who's either younger or junior. And that goes over a kind of 6 to 9 month period of the year with various kind of workshops where we bring the whole group together. But there's also just the kind of partnership catch-ups in between as well. And like I say, we're not overly prescriptive in terms of what those couplings need to kind of concentrate on, but typically we see themes around inclusivity, technical, all things around digital and sort of technically how we deliver our projects. And then also environmental things as well, what our offices are like and what our ways of working look like, that sort of thing. Neil and I have both taken part in that programme, and it's absolutely brilliant because what it gets you to do is kind of explore and challenge yourself on on all sorts of different parts of the business and how we operate and how we can be better and how we can strive for things to just look a little bit different, but kind of with that constant improvement. But I mentioned kind of inclusivity as one of those themes, and it's kind of come up already. Hugely important for Curtins to be seeking to kind of break down the barriers in terms of diversity of workforce. And ultimately, what we want to make sure is when people join Curtins, they feel like they belong. That's what it kind of fundamentally comes down to. Because if you feel like you belong, you feel like you've been considered, you're much more likely to kind of thrive. And if you thrive as an individual, then Curtins will thrive as a collective. And that is on its most, kind of basic form what we're trying to achieve. But and particularly as Neil mentioned, it is a predominantly male industry, and we're stuck at around 12 to 14% of graduates being female. It's been that way for about 10 years now, stubbornly. So there's not an enormous talent pool of women for us to be attracting. But what we have done is put all sorts of things in place to try and make Curtins more attractive, I suppose, than the next place. And we've seen real successes in that. So our graduate intake that I mentioned for the last 6 years has been there or thereabouts 50-50 gender split.
Amazing. Literally significantly higher.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's not through positive discrimination. That is through I suppose the reputation of Curtins, the things that we've put in place to make the business much more attractive to women, and that extends from. So we've just rewritten the guidance on inclusive PPE. It still blows my mind that it's taken until 2025 for this to happen, but there was no guidance for businesses to be able to provide inclusive PPE. So it was typically then designed for a 6 foot male and. There's health and safety implications of that. So you've got, people that are smaller in stature.
I'm a former auditor. I remember going out doing stock counts on building sites.
Mm-hmm. And you rolling your trousers up 3 times.
Absolutely ridiculous.
And
huge
then you've got
hard hats. And
and then you've got to climb a ladder or whatever. But also what it says is you don't belong because we haven't considered that somebody that's not a 6 foot man could want to work in this industry. So what we've done is we've really tried to kind of challenge that and saying, right, okay, well, here's the guidance, and it's now there for not just in construction, but for businesses to be able to use that so that women feel like they belong. Similarly with the work that we've done around menstruation, for example. So we were getting reports from our team that they'd go out onto site, women, and if they could find a female toilet, which isn't guaranteed, there was almost no chance that there would be any kind of sanitary bin in there.
Yeah.
And if you're on site for months at a time, this is
a bit of a deal breaker, isn't it? Frankly,
it's a deal maker. So you've got people then being really, really concerned about going out onto site, and that could then lead to people, even if we've managed to attract them to join in the industry, then leaving the industry. So simple win for us was to put period products in our offices, and I don't think that's particularly innovative. I think that's just kind of quite a basic human right being met. But what was more challenging for us was people that were going out onto site. So we've now put kind of period kits into our pool cars and our pool vans, so that we can't kind of directly affect the construction sites because we're not managing those sites. But what we can do is make it that little bit easier for our staff who are going out onto those sites. And I think it sounds like quite a basic thing. It's quite an easy win in some ways. But I think that what it actually means in terms of its implications shouldn't be underestimated when you think, okay, I've been thought about, I've been considered, I belong. And it's I suppose, building that environment. Similarly with we've got rooms in our offices where people can use them to express milk. So, breastfeeding mothers returning from maternity leave, already a hugely kind of disruptive, I suppose, time in people's lives. What can we do to just make that a little bit easier? Right, we'll give you a private space with a little fridge where you can express your milk. It's not a big thing.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science.
It's not as complicated as building the building, is it?
Yeah, exactly. But that's the kind of thing that I think any business can do to just make people feel like they belong.
I think I just think it's so important, and it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Really, if you want to be open to the wider talent pool, and I think it gets us onto the final bit that I want to talk about, and I'll come back to you, Neil. I mean, this sense of infrastructure as a way to regenerate communities. And in this case, by literally opening up opportunities to like all the population, not just half of it, i.e. blokes. Let's talk a little bit about your sense of how important this is if we're going to see a Britain that's got barriers broken down, it's leveled up, whatever you want to call it, reindustrialised. Where do you think it fits in for government, this kind of work that you're doing?
Well, I suppose in the first instance, defining what we mean by infrastructure. And I mean, we
because people bandy it about, don't
we referenced
they?
before social infrastructure, and the building infrastructure that goes with that, the transport and access infrastructure, providing greater access to all members of our communities so they can get the healthcare education that they need, the energy infrastructure that is ever more important. A lot of that driven by producing green energy and being self-sufficient as a nation, so that we're not reliant on external sources, but then also the increasing demand for energy because of the data technology, I suppose, revolution that's
it's
happening.
that next wave, isn't it, that we haven't really talked about as a country, but is essential.
And it's coming and it's here.
Happening.
And again, as a business, it's a massive opportunity for us, both in terms of skills development, because it's a slightly niche area of what we already do. I mean, the government's recognised the importance or the criticality of data centres, for example, by classifying them as critical infrastructure. So it's how we can use those projects to improve communities. So, for example, data centres produce a lot of waste heat. Well, let's use that. That's green energy if we use it in the right way, but only if those projects are coordinated, that it's a data centre associated with housing. So how you can help in a post-industrial area regenerate housing whilst also improving our data infrastructure. So how can we start joining up the bits of infrastructure that are going to improve the lives of the people who live here, who live in those communities? And always for us, the mainstay or the bedrock of our business and the projects we deliver has been in health, education and housing. When Bill started the business, they were the sectors we worked in. They remain the main sectors for us. And that is the social infrastructure. But how can we leverage the data centres, the energy infrastructure, the transport infrastructure to improve, almost create a virtuous circle around all the elements of infrastructure,
and then looking at how that can be woven into procurement, so that actually you're designing these right first time to deliver all of that, rather than trying to connect it all up afterwards.
Yeah, and I suppose our industry, I think, has long been guilty of that procurement, a race to the bottom. The lowest price is the most important, not necessarily outcomes and value added to local communities. And we're learning. Procurement is much better. But I think we've still got a way to go, because those outcomes, or certainly the measures, KPIs, if you like, they drive behaviours. So if you get the measures wrong, the behaviours will be wrong. So we've still got a long way to go, I think. But we're definitely, that's the track we're all rowing along.
Anything else before we wrap up that you think, in terms of that next stage ahead for Curtins, having more impact, having that influence, in a wider community? Where else do you think you'll be looking over the coming years?
I think that we keep referring back to, again, these are Bill's quotes, if you like, from the early 70s, talking about doing socially worthwhile work. So I trot out this quote from Bill in one of his internal publications. So what do we mean by socially worthwhile work? And this idea that we can all feel proud. Rhiannon described going past Albert Dock and saying, Mummy did that. Yeah. We all feel massively proud of these projects that regenerate communities or do good, whatever we define good to be. And I'm back to the comment I made earlier about the ethical decisions. I'd like to think that in the future we never have an ethical decision to make, because we're too busy delivering housing regeneration, the renewal and regeneration of our healthcare estate, likewise schools and universities, that there is so much of that to be delivered. Likewise, improving the digital and data infrastructure in the country, producing green energy, that these are the purposeful projects. And I think that's where we're trying to head towards.
Right, well, I think we better wrap it up now. But we're really proud to have you part of the Purpose Coalition. So it's fantastic having your leadership on, as I think people can probably pick up, so many different aspects of driving change and social mobility. So Neil Parkinson, Rhiannon Carss, thanks very, very much for doing the podcast today.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Thank you.